The morning wind carried dust across the lonely road, as a tired drifter guided his old horse toward a small valley, hidden between gentle hills. His boots were worn thin. His coat had been patched more times than he could remember, and the few coins in his pocket would barely buy a loaf of bread. For months he had traveled from ranch to ranch, asking only for honest work. Some people turned him away before he could even finish speaking. Others promised to call him back but never did. Even so, he never stopped believing that somewhere beyond the next hill, life might finally offer him another chance. As the sun climbed higher, he spotted a weathered ranch surrounded by split-rail fences. A few cattle grazed peacefully, while chickens wandered near a wooden porch. The place showed signs of hard work, but also of loneliness. Paint had faded from the barn, and several fence posts leaned as if waiting for someone strong enough to repair them. He tied his horse beside the gate and removed his hat before walking toward the porch. A woman stepped outside, carrying a bucket of fresh water. Her eyes were kind but careful, the eyes of someone who had learned not to trust strangers too quickly. "I heard you might need an extra hand," he said quietly. "I can mend fences, break horses, repair roofs, or do whatever needs doing. I only ask for fair work and a place in the barn." She studied him for several silent moments. His clothes were poor, but his eyes held honesty instead of desperation. "You've traveled far," she said. "I have. Family?" He looked toward the distant hills before answering. "Not anymore." She nodded slowly, as though she understood more than he had spoken aloud. Then she surprised him. "My daughter needs a father." The words struck him harder than any storm. He blinked in confusion. "I only came looking for work." "I know. I don't understand." She glanced toward the open doorway, where a little girl stood holding a rag doll made from old cloth. The child smiled shyly before hiding behind the doorframe. "My husband passed away 3 winters ago," the woman said softly. "Since then, my daughter has asked the same question every birthday." She paused. "Will someone ever teach me to ride like Daddy did?" The drifter felt something tighten inside his chest. "I can't replace her father. No one can," the woman answered. "But every child deserves someone who stays." Silence settled between them. Finally she pointed toward the barn. "You can work here as long as you wish." That evening he repaired broken stalls until darkness covered the valley. After supper, the little girl carried 2 cups of warm tea to the porch. "Mother says thank you," she whispered. He smiled. "You carried both cups all by yourself." She nodded proudly. "I'm getting stronger. I can see that." She hesitated before asking, "Will you still be here tomorrow?" He looked toward the fading sunset. "If your mother still needs help." Her smile was brighter than the evening stars. The next morning began before sunrise. Together, they repaired fences, fixed wagon wheels, and cleared fallen branches after an old storm. Day by day, the ranch slowly came back to life. The little girl followed him everywhere. She watched him hammer nails. She watched him saddle horses. She even tried learning how to whistle, though every attempt made them both laugh. For the first time in many years, laughter returned to the ranch. One afternoon she pointed toward a young horse grazing nearby. "Can I learn?" He hesitated. "Only if your mother agrees." The woman watched from the porch before giving a gentle nod. He carefully lifted the little girl onto the calm horse, while keeping one hand firmly on the thumb. "Always respect the horse," he told her. "Never force it. Trust is earned." She repeated every word as though memorizing a treasure. Within days, she could guide the horse across the field with growing confidence. Each evening, they returned smiling. The woman often watched quietly from the porch. She noticed how patiently he answered every question, how he never raised his voice, how he always remembered to leave the last biscuit for the child. One rainy afternoon, she found him repairing an old wooden rocking chair. "It belonged to my husband," she said. "I guessed." "How?" "You polished the arms. People only care for furniture like that when memories are sitting in it." She smiled sadly. "I couldn't bear throwing it away." "You shouldn't." When the chair was finished, it looked almost new again. Tears filled her eyes. "No one has fixed anything for this family in a very long time." He simply shrugged. "Some things deserve another chance." Weeks became months. Neighbors began noticing the changes. The fences stood straight again. The cattle looked healthier. Flowers bloomed beside the porch. Most importantly, the lonely silence had disappeared. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor stopped by with supplies. "I haven't seen this ranch so full of life since the old days," he said with a smile. After he left, the woman looked toward the drifter working beside the barn. "Seems you've become part of this place," he answered, without looking up. "I'll leave once everything is finished." She lowered her eyes. "What if I don't want everything to be finished?" He froze. The hammer rested quietly in his hand. Before either could speak again, the little girl came running across the yard holding 3 wildflowers. "One for Mother." She handed over the first flower. "One for you." She gave him the second. Then she looked at the last flower for a long moment. "This one belongs to our family." Neither adult spoke. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass across the valley, while the child smiled with complete innocence. For the first time in years, the drifter realized he no longer dreamed about the next town. He dreamed about tomorrow on this ranch. Morning arrived, with golden sunlight spreading across the valley. The drifter woke before anyone else, as he always did. He fed the horses, filled the water troughs, and checked every fence along the pasture. As he worked, he realized something had quietly changed inside him. For the first time in years, he was not counting the days until he would leave. He was thinking about planting crops for next season, repairing the old windmill before winter, and teaching a little girl everything he knew. After breakfast, the child ran toward him with excitement. "Can we ride today?" He smiled. "Only after your lessons," she sighed dramatically, making both adults laugh. Every afternoon became another adventure. He taught her how to read animal tracks, how to tell if rain was coming, by watching the clouds, and how to treat every horse with kindness, instead of fear. She listened carefully, repeating every lesson, until she remembered it perfectly. One evening, they climbed a small hill overlooking the ranch. The little girl watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. "My father used to bring Mother here." He remained silent. She looked up at him. "I don't remember his face anymore." His heart grew heavy. "Sometimes I feel bad because I can't remember." He knelt beside her. "Love isn't only remembering someone's face." "It isn't?" "No." "What is it then?" "It's remembering the goodness they left behind." She thought about his words for a long time before smiling. "Mother says he was kind. Then every time you're kind, a part of him is still here." She hugged him tightly, without saying another word. From the porch, the woman watched them together. Tears quietly filled her eyes. Several weeks later, a wealthy ranch owner rode into the valley. He had heard about the drifter's skill with horses, and offered him a full-time position managing a much larger ranch. "The pay is twice what anyone around here can offer," the man said. "You'll have your own cabin and steady work." It was the opportunity he had searched for during years of wandering. He thanked the ranch owner, and asked for one night to think. That evening he sat alone beside the barn, staring into the quiet darkness. The woman found him there. "You're leaving. It would be a good job. You deserve good things." He nodded but said nothing. She looked toward the house where her daughter slept peacefully. "When you first came here, you asked only for work. I remember. I answered with words that probably sounded foolish." He smiled softly. "You said your daughter needed a father." "I did." She took a slow breath. "I wasn't asking for someone to replace the past." He listened quietly. "I was hoping someone might help us believe in the future." The wind whispered through the trees. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," she continued. "But I know this ranch has become a home again, because you chose to stay." Before he could answer, the little girl appeared in the doorway, wearing her night blanket. "I couldn't sleep." She walked over, carrying something behind her back. "I made this." She handed him a small wooden picture frame. Inside was a simple drawing made with colored pencils. It showed 3 people standing in front of the ranch, beneath a bright blue sky. Above the drawing she had carefully written 4 uneven words. "Our family under God's sky." His hands trembled. "You forgot someone," he whispered. She shook her head. "No, there are only 3 people." She smiled. "That's everyone." He could no longer hide the tears filling his eyes. The next morning, the wealthy ranch owner returned for his answer. "So," the man asked, "are you ready to come with me?" The drifter looked across the ranch. The little girl was feeding chickens while laughing at something only she understood. The woman stood beside the porch, waiting quietly. refusing to pressure him. He smiled. I'm already where I belong. The ranch owner tipped his hat respectfully. Then I hope you never regret it. I won't. Months passed. The harvest was better than anyone expected. Neighbors often gathered at the ranch for meals, music, and celebrations. The lonely place had become the warmest home in the valley. One crisp autumn evening, the drifter walked onto the porch, carrying a small wooden box. I made something. The woman opened it. Inside rested a simple silver ring. It isn't expensive, he said, but it's honest. She looked into his eyes. I've spent years praying that my daughter would grow up in a home filled with kindness. She gently placed her hand in his. I think that prayer has already been answered. With happy tears, she accepted. The little girl, who had secretly been listening behind the door, burst outside, cheering louder than either of them had ever heard. I knew it. She threw her arms around them both. A few weeks later, the entire valley gathered beneath the old oak tree beside the ranch. There were no grand decorations, no fancy clothes, and no expensive gifts. Friends brought homemade pies, fresh bread, and wildflowers gathered from nearby fields. As the sun began to set, they promised to face every season together, whether it brought sunshine or storms. Years later, travelers passing through the valley often stopped at the ranch. They always noticed the strong fences, healthy horses, and laughter echoing across the fields. If anyone asked how such a happy family had come together, the old ranchers would simply smile and say, sometimes a man rides into town looking for a job, but God has something far greater waiting for him. And every evening, as the family sat together on the porch, watching another western sunset, the drifter silently thanked God for the day. A kind woman looked at a weary stranger and said, my daughter needs a father. Kind